Thank you, Heather from Canada.
Thanks, Tina. Can I be heard?
You can.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Tina, and thanks for the opportunity to come to this meeting, my home meeting, and to share my message and my story. So I'm Heather, and I'm codependent. So what does it mean to be codependent? Defined by the Oxford Dictionary, codependency is an excessive emotional and psychological reliance on a partner, typically one who requires support on account of an illness or addiction. Or more simply put, you break it, we fix it. Codependency is also defined as a dysfunctional relationship pattern characterized by self-sacrifice, where one person prioritizes another's needs to the point of neglecting their own, often in a caretaker or enabler role. This imbalance can lead to low self-esteem, identity issues, and an inability to set boundaries. Codependent relationships are unhealthy dynamics that involve families, friends, or romantic partners, and they often stem from trauma, neglect, or conditions like addiction. Or in short form, setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. The Code Blue Book doesn't define codependency, but lists the behavior patterns of codependence that result from growing up in dysfunctional families or trauma. The Big Book states we have a disease of the mind and body, a spiritual malady we are unable to control no matter how hard we try. I see myself in all of these definitions. Today I'm going to talk about what it was like living with codependency, what happened, and what life is like now. I grew up in a dysfunctional home. My dad was an alcoholic and workaholic, and my mom was a codependent. While our physical needs were met, my brother and I had little emotional support. Our parents were always busy or preoccupied. I came to believe that I didn't matter, and I craved love and attention. And my earliest memory of this is really also my earliest memory. I can remember being about 4 years old and being at a family function where we were sitting around a campfire and we were roasting marshmallows. And I had roasted the perfect marshmallow. And I got up from my lawn chair to, of course, go show my mom and dad what a great job I had done, get some love and attention. And I tripped on the leg of another lawn chair and ended up falling in the bonfire and burning both of my shins. And so, you know, on reflection in recovery, looking at that situation, it was, you know, that looking for attention, you know, brought disastrous results. So my child's mind decided that the only way for me to get attention was to be a good girl. I would mind my manners, speak when spoken to, do as I was told. I learned that making others happy made me feel loved, at least for a moment. When it didn't work, I became an expert at reading moods, always watching for who might give me approval or who might withhold it. Disapproval was like rejection, proof that I was bad and unlovable. I grew to believe love was transactional. Be good, you get love. Misbehave, you don't. The message I absorbed was simple but destructive. You have to be perfect. But perfection was impossible. To cover any mistakes or misbehaviors, I learned to lie, anything to avoid shame or rejection. It was a complicated dance that became exhausting and rarely got me what I wanted. As flawed as my strategies were, I continued to use them for the next 50 years. I used them to get attention from boys in high school, to make friends, to get approval from teachers. But I was never happy. This abandonment of self, this participation in transactional love, left me feeling hollow inside, and I grew to believe that there was something wrong with me. I didn't really matter. I was unlovable. To cope with these thoughts, I numbed out with reading and later in high school with alcohol to avoid my feelings. At 21, I met my husband, who was a recovering alcoholic. He was the first person I remember ever telling me they loved me. At last, I had the safety and love that I had been craving. I didn't give a moment's thought to what I could bring to the marriage, only what I was going to get. In my mind, to keep this love, I had to be the perfect wife and mother, because if I didn't, my greatest fear would come true. I'd be alone with nothing and no one. Having found my knight in shining armor, I became very passive in my marriage. From big decisions like when we would have children to small ones like what we'd have for supper, the focus was always on what my husband wanted. If he was happy, I was happy. It seemed like a wonderful solution at the time, but I often ended up resentful and angry. And I'm sure he did too, as I offloaded all the responsibility onto him. I exhibited all the classic codependent traits of mothering, monitoring, manipulating, and martyrdom as I obsessed over him and his happiness. My relationship with my boys followed the same pattern. Their happiness came first. I hated to correct them for fear they'd no longer love me. I had no tools to teach them how to resolve conflict. And when frustrated, I would end up angry and in tears, leaving my kids wondering, who was this crazy lady? For the next 37 years, my days were filled with spinning plates in various roles: wife, mother, daughter, teacher, friend, colleague, exhausting myself mentally and physically, trying to be everything to everyone but myself. No request was denied. Resentment grew, and yet asking for help wasn't an option. I had to do it all myself. My boys grew up in a home where their mother was preoccupied. Sound familiar? Trying to be perfect, making everyone happy and failing, and miserable myself. When my kids left home, I had a minor crisis. What was I going to do now? Who was I going to be? How was I going to get the love and attention I needed? I wondered, was this it? Was this all there was to my life? I turned to achievements. I got my master's degree, hired a life coach, and wrote a book. And then I wrote 3 more books. Maybe if I lost weight. None of it worked. Or it worked for a brief period, and then I was off looking for something else to make me feel better on the inside. Then I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, my body telling me my soul was sick, but I didn't listen. When COVID happened, my husband relapsed in his drinking, and it progressed rapidly. At this point, my life was out of control. Trying to get my husband to quit drinking while my body was in a state of constant agony. I was numb mentally and emotionally. Which brings me to the day of my bottom, February 8th, 2021, when the police showed up at our door because my husband had crashed our car into a snowbank. My first thought was, what are people going to think? At that moment, I realized that my life couldn't go on as it had been. I had tried every good idea I had to get my husband to quit drinking. Begging, yelling, crying, anger, and contempt. None of it worked. My whole life revolved around my husband and his drinking. I covered up his drinking from our kids and felt it was my job to fix him. When I think back to the darkness of that day and the emotional and physical pain I was in, I now see it as a blessing. I didn't think that at the time, but it set in motion the chain of events that guided me to finding a spiritual solution to my problem and saving my life. My introduction to codependency happened when I took part in a family program through a rehabilitation center. I'd never heard of the word before, and I righteously thought, I am not the problem. But I began to Family Anonymous meetings each week because it was going to help my loved one. I'd do whatever it took. I attended these meetings for about 3 months, and while I began to get an awareness of what it meant to be codependent, I knew a family group that only shared check-ins about their addicts was not going to give me the answers I wanted. How do I get my partner to stop drinking and stay sober? I wanted to control my partner to make myself feel better. On June 13th, 2021, I attended my first CODA online meeting. In true codependent fashion, I hid. I kept my camera off and I didn't say a word. One of the readings they did each week was The Patterns of Codependency, which was a real eye-opener. As each pattern was read, I did a mental check mark. Think they can take care of themselves without any help from others? Check. Do not perceive themselves as lovable or worthwhile persons? Check. Put aside their own interests in order to do what others want? Check. Of the over 50 patterns, I identified with nearly all of them. At first, I was shocked. My behavior was the problem? I stuck with that meeting for 9 months and slowly started to understand that I did have a problem. Not just a problem, a compulsive disease, just like my husband. But as helpful as that knowledge was, I couldn't stop my codependent behaviors. As time went on, I realized I wasn't going to get better unless I found a sponsor and worked the steps. But in those 9 months, no one was offering sponsorship in the meetings I attended. What I now see as higher powers guidance, I was led to a weekly step meeting that used the CODA handbook. I figured if I couldn't find a sponsor, I could start some of the work necessary to work the steps. One week early on, a woman came to our meeting and shared about her experience, how recovery had changed her life and now how God was her one director. Then she offered her number as a sponsor. I texted her immediately and my recovery journey began. That was my step one. I finally realized no one was going to save me. I had to save myself. My sponsor was very clear and direct about my instructions. And as I was so miserable that I followed without question. And also because I'm a people pleaser and I wanted her to like me. Steps 2 and 3 asked me to be willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Asked me to be willing to believe a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Before the steps, my conception of a higher power was an authority figure who passed judgment, punished wrong behavior, and tested my faith. The only time I prayed was as a last resort. When all of my great ideas had yielded 0 results, then I'd turn to higher power. And often my prayers went unanswered. Now I was being asked to create my own God concept. What attributes would I give to a benevolent entity that would make me sane again? I chose love, kindness, patience, grace, tolerance, compassion, and forgiveness. In time, as I worked the steps, I learned that faith and trust in a higher power meant that I had to turn to higher power first. Step 4 was where the rubber met the road. I was terrified to do a 4th step. I was going to have to put on paper all of my resentments, my fears, and harms, and there were many. It was a lifetime list of the ways that I had used people to get what I wanted. But I took the words fearless and searching seriously. I wanted to get better, and if this was the only way to do it, I was willing to walk through that fire. I was not the selfless, self-sacrificing person I believed myself to be, but instead I was selfish, self-obsessed, and self-conscious. The day of my 5th step was truly revealing. As we went through my inventories, I felt a weight begin to lift and a greater understanding of myself to take root. With each inventory item, my sponsor asked me, when this happened, it means I am, and I had to fill in the blank. This simple question got to the root of what I believed about myself. I don't matter, I'm unloved, and I'm alone. I had internalized all the actions and words of others into what I believed about myself. No wonder I was miserable. Next, my sponsor had me write the positive opposites of these beliefs as new ideals. With a solid understanding of my defects of character, I moved on to step 6 and 7. No one was more ready than me to have them removed. What I've learned over the past 4 years is that this doesn't happen instantly. The removal of my defects is up to higher power and higher power's timeline. But I have to acknowledge them and ask for them to be removed. To finally clear my side of the street, I made a list of those I'd harmed and made amends. Again, with the foundation of steps 4 and 5, I knew why I'd harmed people the way I had, and that connection to my higher power was dependent on doing this, no matter the outcome. My making amends to my husband and kids was difficult, but making amends to my parents, my dad had passed by this time, and my mom was in late stage dementia, brought relief, grace, and forgiveness. Steps 10 and 11, the Design for Living steps, keep me connected to my higher power on a daily basis and help me continue to build a solid foundation of recovery. At first, I prayed in my head, but this has evolved into a written meditation that works well for me. Over time, I went from constantly checking in with higher power to trusting that higher power's guidance would come at the exact time I needed it. My fears slowly went away, often without me noticing. I went from seeking higher power when things were desperate to consulting higher power first. I credit step 12 as the step that keeps me from relapsing in my disease. Immediately after completing the steps, my sponsor gave me the resources and directions to become a sponsor myself. She told me, all you need to do is show up. Fear and self-consciousness nearly overwhelmed me, but I attended meetings, read and shared when it inspired, even if my voice cracked with nervousness or someone said it better. I made sponsorship my job. For this was the only way to stay connected to my higher power and perform his work well. Sponsorship has taught me countless lessons, but the biggest one is to let go. If a protege asks to be taken through the steps, that's higher power at work. If a protege drops off at step 4, that's higher power at work too. I can't want someone's recovery more than they do. I'm merely a channel to carry the message, and how that turns out isn't up to me. My only responsibility is to do the next right thing. On page 181 of the big book, Dr. Bob explains why he sponsors those who still suffer. A sense of duty, a joy in service, and a debt of gratitude to the man who took the time to pass it on to him. And because every time he does, he takes out a little more insurance against a possible slip. Like Dr. Bob, I see sponsorship as both a duty and a gift. It's my way of paying forward what was freely given to me. I will be forever grateful to my sponsor for taking me through the steps. I can't imagine life without this program, and I can only hope to repay that debt through service. Sponsorship is a reciprocal relationship. The protege is guided through the steps, and the sponsor gets to work the steps again and again with each person they help. Every time I go through the process with someone new, I learn something more about my own recovery. I'm reminded that I'm not here to help people who haven't asked to be helped. And often what I share with a protege is exactly what I need to hear myself. Life for me today, as I live in the solution, is very different. My two jobs in these 24 hours are simple: to stay close to my higher power and perform his work well. On page 133 of the big book, it says, "We avoid the deliberate manufacture of misery." I read that line every time I find myself caught up in the past or the future, and then I hand it over to higher power. I don't wake up with a feeling of dread every day or walk around with a pit of fear and anxiety in my stomach. I trust higher power has things under control, and all I need to do is the next right thing. I don't get involved in other people's relationships. I tend to my own, first with my higher power and then with those around me. I no longer isolate, hide, or keep secrets, but I also don't share what isn't mine to share. I don't take responsibility for other people's feelings or actions. I live the principles of the program by telling my truth and saying no to anything I can't lovingly participate in. And I wait. Everything happens in God's time. If I'm forcing or pushing, that's self-will. God's guidance always comes with peace and clarity. Living in the solution has brought me many blessings, and before I close, I'd like to acknowledge with gratitude some of the gifts the program has given me. First of all, the opportunity to be the daughter I'd always hoped to be for my mom. During her dementia journey, I felt extreme guilt that there was something I should be able to do to make her better. The program helped me to see that I don't have that control. I can't cure dementia. What I could do is show up for my mom and spend time with her, even if she didn't know who I am. The program allowed me to deliver a heartfelt eulogy to my mom that celebrated all her wonderful characteristics without resentment or anger. I have a new renewed relationship with my brother, whom I resented because he didn't live near us and left me to take care of my mom. Without expectations or keeping score, we meet on equal footing. The gift of a sponsor who corrects my distorted thinking when necessary and encourages my service work. A marriage where we aren't enmeshed in each other's lives. I'm not trying to fix my husband, but letting both of us live our own lives, whatever that looks like. And I'm going to add a little anecdote here. Yesterday, I was going over my speech with my husband, and I thought about the day before we had a discussion about his health care. He's had some health challenges this year. and he was trying to convince me of something he wanted me to do in regard to that. And I said, well, no, I think we'll just leave it up to higher power and we'll know when the time is right to do whatever we need to do. And he said, 2 or 3 years ago, I could have convinced you in 2 minutes to do what I wanted. And I said, yeah, well, that doesn't work anymore. We don't do that. So, yeah, so I've really learned to live in my own integrity and not just go along with whatever I think my husband thinks we should do. It's given me the gift of making a living amends to my children and grandchildren, being the mom and grandma who loves freely, keeps her nose in her own business, and doesn't need to be rescued or protected. The gift of knowing my higher power and I are responsible for my life, and that is a fulfilling life of purpose, and no one else is going to do that or give me that. Patience, practice, persistence, and perspective are the skills I need to live this program successfully. Patience that everything will happen in God's time and way, which is very difficult for codependents who want to feel better right now. Practice the tools of the program, pause, turn, do a tenth, be helpful and useful. Persistence, no change happens overnight, even though we'd like it to. Stick around until the miracle happens. And perspective, don't label things good or bad. Most of the time they are neutral and God is in it all. And finally, the gift of a successful recovery and a meaningful life both require action. If you had told me that the most miserable moment in my life would lead to the place where I truly belonged, I would have thought you were crazy. But I do belong here with all of the rest of you beautiful people. I want to thank the members of this meeting for their generosity of spirit and vulnerability in sharing their wisdom and experience. The big book tells us we improve in effectiveness and understanding, and this group has been a large part of that for me. And I'll pass.
Thank you, Heather. Are you open to people asking questions?
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, you can just unmute if you have a question for Heather. I have a question. I'm Tina in Idaho. My question is, I know that you do a lot of service for our meeting, and I'm wondering, our meetings, I'm wondering what have been the gifts. Well, first of all, why? And secondly, what have been the gifts of that for you?
Great question. Yeah. Why do I do service? Well, I think, like I said, it goes back to Dr. Bob's opinion. I feel a very strong commitment to making sure that meetings are there for people who are still sick and suffering. And if I don't do it, if this program wasn't around when I was looking for it, I'd still be sick and suffering. And so I think that's the why of it. What do I get from service? I get fellowship. I do service in 4 different meetings. Each meeting is very different. A couple of meetings have just a core group of people that I really love and, who are committed in the same way I am to providing service. So that for sure is the fellowship part of it. always a deeper understanding of my program. I always go back to, the big book when it says we will grow in understanding and effectiveness. And I think doing service work is a big part of that, because we're constantly learning about ourselves, about our disease, about our recovery all the time. And, it's not a destination. It's not, I finish the steps and I'm good to go. It is that, it's going to be a lifelong journey for me. Like I said, I can't imagine, like, what would I do without my meetings and my service work? I'd be right back, in my codependency. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Heather. Somebody else was speaking up with a question. Who is that person?
I see Melinda and I see Jay.
It was it was Melinda, codependent in Massachusetts. Hello. Thank you, Heather, so much for your sharing. I related so much. It was really informative for me. And my question is, you said something like that one of the gifts of your recovery was a life of fulfilling purpose. Can you say what that purpose is?
That purpose is, well, first of all, that purpose is my role in the fellowship, my service work, and so on. But I also see it happening now that I'm, a little farther out from my step work. It happens in my daily life as well. So it's anywhere that I can be helpful and useful. For example, I was a teacher for 31 years. I've been retired for 7. I still tutor kids. So it's God providing those opportunities where I can use my gifts and skills. And that's what makes my life purposeful and fulfilling, is knowing, and God never says, Heather, you should tutor, or Heather, you should sponsor more people, or whatever. God just puts that stuff in your path, in my experience. Anyway, those things come along. I do security in a lot of the meetings. That's a skill that I have, and it provides me the opportunity to be helpful and useful, and that gives me a sense of purpose. And yeah, and day by day, I don't know what I'm here to do. That's higher power is going to let me know. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Jay, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Heather, very much. I could resonate with so much of what you said. And what I'd like to ask you, well, first, I'd like to just preface what resonated about your speaker statement was that you said you had to save yourself when your husband had to crash. And that to me was a shift from where before you said you were looking for someone to save you. And then you went on to say that you started consulting your higher power first for your spiritual malady, your illness. And my question is, can you share what actions you took to make that shift from self-reliance to God reliance? In other words, what did that look like specifically in your daily walk?
I think it developed over time, first of all. I know, like, when I think about when I finished the steps, like even the first week after finishing the steps, I was constantly talking to God, like, God, am I supposed to be doing this? God, am I supposed to be doing that? Are you talking to me? That kind of thing. And I even mentioned it, in my sponsor said to me, God doesn't talk in code. And so that was kind of the first realization, is that, I didn't have to check in with God all the time. And I think as well is that, my nightly prayer routine which I still do to this day. I do a prayer and I give up anything that I need to give up to higher power that happened or that I'm confused about. I do that at night. And often, you know, in the morning, right as I'm kind of just waking up, I get that's when my kind of God download happens for me. Um, and yeah, and I just, you know, I learn to relax, you know, when it says in the big book, we relax, we don't struggle. That was another part of it that helped me to realize, you know, I just have to let go, do my things, like do what I'm supposed to do, go to meetings, do my service work, participate in that kind of thing. And that relationship and that connection and that kind of guidance just grows and develops over time. I mean, it gets stronger all the time. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much.
Emma, do you have a question for Heather?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, my phone's a little bit dodgy. Yeah, that was lovely, Heather. Yeah, I really identified with a lot, and it was beautiful to hear you say that you were able to give like a beautiful eulogy for your mum. And it's something I've often thought about recently. And I think, how would I be able to do something like that after everything that she'd done? And that suggests to me that there is still some lingering resentment there. So I definitely need to look at that. But my question is, in the big book, it talks about, there's a passage in the big book that talks about you know, being helpful to, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something about being helpful to others and constantly think of others and how we may meet their needs. And that's something that I get confused about as a codependent. You like constantly looking for everyone else. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think, you know, as a codependent, that gets a little tricky. And when I first finished my steps, I thought helpful and useful was only like in this narrow little window of, you know, meetings or sponsorship or doing service. And I think over time that has kind of widened, you know, to other things. Like lots of times it's helpful and useful if I do the dishes. Lots of times it's helpful and useful if I have a shower and I go on the treadmill, you know. And so when it comes to other people, um, I have learned, because I always wanted to provide like expert advice, my own, especially to my kids and my grandkids and how they were all, you know, doing their thing. I just learned to say, you know, how can I help? And, you know, and I can ask that of higher power, you know, higher power, how can I help? And, you know, something will come up in a way that kind of plays to your strengths and your gifts. And that's what I find. So I find when we first finish the step, we're kind of clutching that. And then as we kind of grow into the journey of living 10, 11, and 12, that we can kind of let that go and it becomes looser and we see more opportunities to be helpful and without sticking our nose in where it's not supposed to be.
Thank you.
Dawn, do you have a question for Heather?
Yes, I definitely, and before the question, I want to thank Higher Power for both of our journeys because we got to walk together for these last 3 years. But I wanted to know, do you still write out nightly reviews at this point in your recovery?
I just kind of that I do in my head, kind of with my prayers at night, right? And I go through the checklist in my head. And yeah, and then my morning meditation is more specific, more of a written, I write certain things in the morning. So yeah. Thanks, Dawn. And thanks for being on this journey with me. Awesome.
Jenny, do you have a question for Heather?
I do. Just kind of a statement, if I can, and a quick question. Heather, I just want to thank you. You made me laugh. You made me cry. I resonate with 99% of your story is my story too. And I'm very, very grateful. I just wanted to say that, having been someone that had worked the program in another fellowship for a very, very long time, how I too was so incredibly grateful when I came to this fellowship and people offered their name, their phone number. I am an available sponsor. I am happy to help. I never experienced that in many, many, many years of working a program, and what a gift. I mean, what a gift that is to me. But I just wanted to say real quickly, do you find that the more open you are to any kind of an opportunity where it's kind of like higher powers tapping you on the shoulder and saying, just over here, just kind of do this thing. This is what I want you to do today. Do you find that it can pop up anywhere?
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely. And, and we still have choice in there. We still have, higher power provides us with the opportunity to do or not to do their guidance. And what I've learned to do is kind of listen and look for those opportunities and to take them. It's very intuitive at this point, and it just it flows is the word I want to use. Yeah.
Linda, do you have a question for Heather?
I do. And first of all, thank you, Heather. Everything you said, I could relate to. And I'm very grateful for your insights. I'm very interested in how you managed codependency and non-codependency with your mom, as I am in a situation where 2 years ago, my husband started going down from dementia, and he's since been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So while he used to be an extremely independent person and hardly ever at home because he was traveling all the time, now he's right here. And we're just living under the same roof. And I struggle with what's being codependent as a caregiver and what isn't.
Right. Yeah. Great question. I will tell you that with my mother, I did it all wrong. Because when my mother started to have dementia, I was not in program at the time. And I viewed her as a burden and something that I had to do to be viewed as a good daughter. But I did it with a lot of resentment and I did it with a lot of anger. And if I had to do it again, I would do it very differently. But what I've learned, my experience with dementia is that you grieve it for a very long, like you start your grief process very early. And with my mom, I did, like I said in my thing, I went through that whole thing. I would leave, like we ended up putting her in a care home. And, I would leave there and just be so upset that, what did I do? If I had been a better daughter, this wouldn't happen, right? Playing God, playing higher power. And, that's what the program taught me. And so then I would just show up, and if we just sat and watched the birds and the bird feeder for half an hour or an hour, that was enough. I could feel at peace, and I knew she was safe and well cared for. And I think step 4 and 5 also helped with that, because for the first time in my life, I saw my parents as real people, and that, they had a childhood that I don't know what they went through. They never told us, what they went through as kids. My mom lost her dad. Her dad was killed in World War II when she was 2 years old. And then she had a stepfather right after that. My dad was the second youngest of 12 kids. So I'm sure that there was some trauma, generational stuff that went with that. And so I could finally, after step 4 and step 5, look at them as just human beings having a human experience, and that they were probably doing the best they could. And they did do the best they could. And so, yeah. So, it's funny you mentioned with your husband, because my husband has had a lot of health complications this last year as well. And, I a lot of times my kind of guiding light was, if he had cancer, what would I do? Right? And so I try to come at it from, what would a loving caretaker do for my husband? Because I will have tendencies to, like, okay, you need to do this. We got to exercise. You got to have your pills. You got to eat now. Now it's time for a nap, that kind of thing. And so it's, yeah, what are they able to do and what do they need help with? And I kind of go with that. And, and yeah, sometimes I get it right and sometimes I don't. I hope that helps.
It helps a lot. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. This is Tina in Idaho. I've heard the statement that in recovery, we encourage people to stick around until they get their miracle. And I'm just wondering how you would describe, or first of all, if you got yours, and how you describe it.
So I think my miracle, I think I did get it. I think sometimes we have a tendency that if things don't happen fast enough, and I found this in my work as well when I was teaching, if things don't happen fast enough for us, we abandon it. And so I'm kind of a stick-to-itive kind of person. So I'm going to hang around and I'm going to give it a really good try, because I don't know how long it's going to take. And I may want it to happen really fast, but that's not the idea. So I think, yes, I have felt the miracle, and I know that I felt the miracle just in the evidence I get day by day of what I interpret as higher power working in my life. And so I think for me, that's how I know the miracle is there.
Thanks, Heather. Diana, do you have a question for Heather?
Hi there. I just want to thank you guys all so much. I'm new to CODA, and it's been a few weeks, and it just fills my heart with so much appreciation. So my question to you, Heather, in regards to, and I think maybe Tina touched on it a little bit, but when you had your awakening, or you're much more connected to your higher power, was that different? Like, in the big book, it talks about, a God of your making, or I'm not sure I'm quoting it properly, but just like a higher power that you relate to. That doesn't necessarily have to be Christian or any faith. It's just your connection. So my question is, did you relate to it the way you thought you'd relate? You know what I mean? Or is the communication a lot different? Or so yeah, I'm just curious in regards to your growth and development, how your relationship with higher power evolved. Mhm.
Yeah, it's very different today than it was when I started the program or even finished my steps. I think I kind of, had the idea, I still clung to kind of the idea that, it was an anthropomorphized kind of version, human characteristics, that kind of thing. I think that has lessened quite a bit. I now just see it more as, higher power working through with me and through me is how I see it now. So I think it's developed into the idea, like when I go to a meeting, I wait to be inspired to speak. I don't, and for a codependent who constantly planned out every conversation she was ever going to have with people, I do not do that anymore. I just trust that higher power is going to give me the words that need to be said in that particular situation. Maybe they'll resonate with somebody, maybe they won't. And so, yeah, it's very different than my, first of all, before recovery conception of God, and even my after steps conception of God. It just continues to grow and to change and morph as I go on this journey and get deeper. So, yeah, hope that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. We're going to transition into our close, and anybody who still has questions, please stick around. There'll be time for more questions in fellowship. I'm going to turn off the recording now.